So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining for another HPP Innovation Week session. My name is Vinicio. I'm an HPP application specialist at Hypervaric. Today is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Tony Moses, Product Innovation Fellow from CRB, who will be presenting some of the trends on the pet food sector, one of the fastest growing segments within the HPP industry. Again, Tony, thank you for joining, for sharing your expertise, and well, the floor is all yours.
Hey, thanks, Vinicio. Great to be here. Today, what I'm hoping to do is share trends in pet food from a manufacturer's point of view. So CRB surveys manufacturers once a year and compiles a report on that. Last year, we chose pet food manufacturers. So I like to think of this of the voice of the manufacturer rather than the voice of the consumer. So what I'll do is go through some of the trends that we're seeing in that area and where we think HPP can add value, especially in some of the high growth markets, high growth and high value. So just a quick overview of what we'll be going through today. Um, I'd love to give you background on how we collect this data. That'll be pretty short, but I think it's important for the participants to understand where it comes from. I want to talk about pet food's ambitious agenda. There's really some awesome things going on in this industry. And then once we kind of see what the industry is doing in general, I'd like to focus in on opportunities for HPP. So this data is coming from CRB's Horizons report. This is a report that is on our website that can be downloaded for free. So if you want more information than what I present, there's a lot more out there, and it's available free at crbgroup.com. And just a little bit of one slide on how we put this report together. We send out anonymous surveys to manufacturers, in this case in the pet food industry. And this report is focused solely on dog and cat food producers. So we excluded smaller mammals, fish, etc. We were just interested in those two markets. We do keep the survey responses anonymous because we're asking about some sensitive information like capital spending plans, total budget, plans to spend on the highest single capital project. So we want to keep this as we want to keep integrity within the data and let people respond freely where they don't think that some of that sensitive information is going to get out. And then we also asked what's motivating that spending and what's motivating their production plans in general. So we will ask them things about what do you think the consumer is interested in, what matters to you as a company, and then we'll put that together to understand where the market's going. This was released May 17th of 2022. We had over 300 respondents for this. Our data collection typically happens December through February before the report is released. Some of the questions that we get in this is right before inflation kind of really took off globally. So we get a lot of questions about, hey, if this were done later, would inflation be a bigger concern? It's possible, but this just gives you an idea of when that data was collected and with the understanding that it's dynamic. Even from the time that we took the data to when we released it, things change. So that just an idea, an understanding on where this data is coming from and where our understanding of these trends are coming from. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what is on the mind of pet food producers, and it's really a lot. It's a really fun set of data to talk about because there are some really ambitious plans. So the first thing that we ask them is really what are the biggest business challenges facing your production. And we see it is a challenging environment. So on the x-axis there, we give them options to choose from. They can choose up to 5 in this one, and so you'll notice that it doesn't always add up to 100%. But this is the percent of people ranking this concern as their top concern, and the number one concern for pet food manufacturers is expectations for manufacturing practices and workplace environments. We think what's driving that is just the general lack of available labor in a lot of markets, and you can see that the third most commonly chosen top concern is labor availability. So between those two bars, it's almost a third of producers are picking that as their biggest challenge. There's some bright news in this data, though. The number two picked, most often picked top concern is increased pet ownership. So they're seeing demand increasing in this space. The fourth one is humanization. So I think that that's an opportunity for manufacturers to enter higher value markets. There tends to be more of a premium on those types of products. And then if you direct your attention to the right side of the graph, what we see at the bottom there, access to capital, regulations, retailer requirements, there had to be maybe one or two respondents out of 300 choosing those. And we think that's good news. Access to capital means manufacturers have the dollars that they need to expand their capabilities and capacity. Regulations, we see that as something that the industry has largely solved for, so that it's not their top business concern. We interpret that as they have structures in place to address those. And same with retailer requirements. Retailers, have different requirements for size, shipment, delivery time, things like that. We think that that's something that the industry has solved. So they're facing kind of the headwinds that businesses in general are of labor issues and inflation issues, but there's some bright spots for pet food, and that's increased demand, humanization, and kind of solving some of those day in, day out challenges of running a business. What stood out to us, though, is that we asked, hey, where are you spending your R&D dollars, your product innovation dollars? What's driving that? And it didn't reflect the challenges necessarily that they're facing out in the business environment. What it did in general reflect is that they're trying to improve their product and provide the features that matter to customers. So the top feature that they ranked, or the most commonly chosen top feature, was sustainability. There's achieving a cleaner label and ingredients at 8% there. Pets as family considerations at 8%. So in those top five, you're seeing a lot of things that really speak to consumers and what they want in their products. When you go over towards the right, those are less commonly chosen as the top driver. Those are things like improving product margins, managing inflation, things like that are less commonly chosen. So the signal that that's sending to us is that even in a challenging environment, values are core to producers, and they're really trying to deliver products that matter to consumers. One other piece of data, or pieces of data that we have from this survey that tell us that demand continues to expand, as we ask them, hey, did COVID have an effect on your capital spending plans? 3/4 were coming back saying it did, and we expect to increase our capital spending based on COVID. Only 10% said we're planning to decrease that spending. Another thing that we look for is SKU rationalization. So our producers planning on offering fewer SKUs to manage costs better, to manage overhead costs better. And 3/4 came back and said, nope, we're not planning to do that. So all this is pointing to producers are still very focused on providing consumers the products with the features that they want, and they're not making compromises despite some of the business challenges that are out there in the environment, which is great news. And it makes it, I think, a fun market to be in, just that in general, and a fun market to talk about for me. We do want to kind of check this data against what we're seeing externally. We watch adoption rates for pets as kind of a leading indicator for demand for these products. When we look at kind of that pre-COVID to post-COVID period there, we're watching to see our rates dropping, our adoption rates dropping as people go back to work and kind of the world normalizes. When you look at 2019 to 2022, you've got an increase in cat adoption of 8%. That's pretty strong coming out of that COVID period. Dog adoption still is positive, right? The rates of adoption are positive. And then on top of that, I think speaking to some of the humanization trends and pets as family considerations, it's almost unanimous that pet owners are saying that pets improve their mental health. It's more than just something to offer food. It's part of the family. So I think that the trends remain strong, and that in pet adoption rates and how we see our pets. And I think the data, even though it is a year old, I think it still is valid and shows that the industry is still trending in this direction. So it's good news for the overall industry. This is an HPP workshop, so we want to talk about what the opportunity is for HPP in this. So I'm going to dive into the data a little bit more that shows how producers are trending um, in terms of what they're making, and then talk about how that in general ties into the HPP community. So really, there's a lot of push towards safe food and clean labels here, and I think that that should speak to a lot of people in the workshop. I think that's one of the advantages of HPP is it can achieve both here. So, and here's the data that supports that statement. When we ask people, what is your top driver of capital projects? It's the ability to meet the food safety plan. We offered them options like cost, meeting schedule, even safety on the job site, and maybe out of a dozen different options, the ability to meet the food safety plan came back as the most frequently chosen number one driver. And we get some additional insight with that too. When there's a whole section in the report about packaging, the top driver of people planning to change their packaging is food safety. So again, this outranks convenience, cost, downtime, all the other options that we gave them. So this industry is strongly pointed towards making safe food. There's additional information in the report where they're even spending capital dollars on infrastructure within their facility to make safe food. So there's lots of examples in the report. This is just a few highlights. And then when we ask them, hey, how important is a clean label, clean ingredients to attracting and keeping customers? What you're seeing is the data is broken out by company size here. So if people are on the phone looking to kind of benchmark, or on the conference looking to benchmark where their companies are versus others, you can see that roughly 90% are saying it's either extremely important or very important. Very few are saying slightly or not at all important. And I think another trend to note in this data is that clean label, clean ingredient feature is more important to larger companies. So the red bar and the orange bar represent companies that make in revenue 100 million to 500 million a year for the red, and over 500 million a year for the yellow there. So you can see that extremely important. There's a big difference between the larger producers and the smaller producers. And then as you drop down into the moderately, slightly not at all important, the rate of those larger producers tends to vanish. So, as we think about HPP, it might be something that speaks more to larger customers than smaller customers or startups. And then I want to make the case that there is a strong need for HPP in terms of where the industry is going in processing. So the data that you're looking at here, we asked producers, what processing methods are you using now and what are you using in the future? These are all the options that we offered them, and then they were able to choose which ones they were considering. So which ones they were using or which ones they were considering. So you'll see the percentages add up to greater than 100%, and that's because manufacturers were choosing multiple processing methods here. there's a couple things that I want to point out. I put a little asterisk by the data that I think that is really indicating that we're moving from a world of high temperature thermal processing to lower thermal processing. So you see oven baking. Our respondents, 44% that said they are currently using it. In the future, that dropped to 34%. That's a pretty significant drop there. When you then look at HPP, which might be an alternative to oven baking, that went from 19% currently using it to 28% plan to use it in the future. And then when you look at retort, this is another high temperature process. Didn't see, I'd say, a significant change there, but where we did see more of a change was on the thermal hot fill, where 28% are using it now and 33% plan to use it in the future. So this data is pointing us towards safe food, clean food at lower temperatures. So I think that's a compelling case for HPP. And I want to break it down into the case for making kibble. So this is, this is kind of the benchmark of the industry, right? The dried kibble. How's that can be done two different ways. You start with typically similar raw materials, and you can oven bake, which is a high temperature process, or you can HPP the meat, the ground meat typically, and then freeze dry it and produce the same appearance kibble, same application there. And I want to point out that if this is something you want to see more detail about, Pet Food Processing did a great profile on Pet Source's plant in Seward, Nebraska, that shows all the different steps and how HPP finds an application in this area. What we hear anecdotally from people within the industry is that pets, if you give them a bowl of kibble made with HPP and freeze drying versus oven baking, they will selectively eat the kibble that are made by HPP and freeze drying before they eat the kibble that's made by oven baking. And I've heard people say it's more of a raw profile. There's just such a strong preference for that the animals have for product that's made at low temperatures versus high temperatures, that it's really a big win. So when we look at where might be the best areas for HPP, I want to break this down again by company size because it tells I think a really interesting story here. When we asked, hey, what current processing methods are you using? We also broke that down by company size. So this is the same data that you were seeing a few slides earlier. But broken down by company size for a benchmarking exercise. And the company size, again, is defined by revenue of the company. So the blue is maybe anything that's pre-revenue up to 20 million a year, and then you can see the different bands. So if you look at who's using, let's start with HPP first. You see it's more common in larger industries, and this is the data on the lower left. So 12% at those pre-revenue to 20 million, and then 27% at industry or at companies that are making $500 million and more. If you go to the right, this is the planned usage. You see every single group jumps. So that to me says that pet food producers see value in HPP across the board. It's not just freeze drying, and I'll make the case for that in a second. So it's interesting to see that large companies, almost half, are planning to use HPP in the next couple of years, which is impressive. For the dry kibble case that I just showed, you would then freeze dry the product after you made the kibble. And what emerges there is that when you look at what companies are planning to use it versus are currently using it, it's a more mixed story. You don't see growth across the board. So that smallest category of companies, it's relatively unchanged. What's notable though is those medium-sized companies, there's significant growth in that area. And then the larger companies, there's actually a decrease in that. And what we think is happening there is that companies are going more towards contract manufacturing for freeze drying because it's such a specialized process. So those contract manufacturers likely sit within those purple and red bars within those sides of companies, and then your larger branded companies are likely in that bar at $500 million and above, and they're starting to think, well, we see HPP uses across the board, but for freeze drying, that's more of a specialized technique, and we're going to go with people that are with other contract manufacturers that excel in that space. So our opinion is that we see growth in the freeze dry and HPP kibble market, but the companies that are planning to freeze dry the product are more in kind of the mid-sized range and maybe more contract manufacturers. With HPP seeing growth across the board, that to us indicates that HPP is likely going to expand into wet pet food as well. And you could see applications in this space for refrigerated product that has high moisture content that hasn't been through the retort process. So that's our read on how this market will trend in the next couple of years from a manufacturing standpoint. And that Vinicio, that's all I had for the workshop today, but I wanted to open it up to questions.
No, thank you, Tony, for the fantastic presentation. Again, well, Tony's a bit modest, but well, CRB is one of the most important, biggest consulting companies for the food and pharmaceutical industry. So we are glad to have them here on the event, and of course, they are a very reliable source in terms of the information. So just a couple of questions. So you identified food safety, sustainability, clean label. Do you see any other major trends as general, not only for the HPP but for the pet food industry, and how can HPP may align with these trends?
Yeah, the other one of the other trends that we look at is regulatory. And typically, writing a section on regulatory is not always the most fun. But this report, it was the opposite. It was a lot of fun. What we're seeing is this industry is extremely savvy and extremely committed to food safety and meeting regulations. So there, I think, is an advantage of HPP. I think there's a great ecosystem out there in terms of validating your HPP step and making sure that it can meet your regulatory requirements. So I think that's an awesome application. Another trend that we're seeing when we looked at product innovation, the least frequently chosen feature are specialized formulas in nutrition. The challenge with pet food is it needs to be nutritionally complete. So I think consumers aren't as focused on those clinical claims. They're more looking into the clean label, clean ingredient claims and seeing that as good for their pets. So I think it's a way HPP preserves a lot of nutrients versus a hot processing technique. So I think it's a way to still provide the nutrition that pets need while speaking to consumers about concerns that they're interested in and potentially overlooking the need for that nutrition. So I think providing the nutrition, it's a great way to preserve those nutrients. And then I'd say from a regulatory standpoint, the industry is very committed and very serious about it. So I think using the ecosystem that's out there to validate kill step with HPP is another potential application.
That's great to know that it's not only the requirements by the regulatory agencies, in this case the FDA for the United States, but also the initiative, the proactive approach that they are taking. And yes, both companies, consumers that are looking into HPP as a tool to enhance safety and while achieving or retaining this clean label and natural approach. So just to wrap up with your excellent presentation, any other trends, key factors that companies might consider for the future to stay ahead of competitors?
Yep. I think one area that we're challenged with within HPP is just making sure that we get the throughput that we need. So I would say stay close. From our point of view, we like to stay close with our equipment manufacturers and use them as a partner. So I'd say if we're running into challenges with processing efficiencies or costs, go back to that. Go back to your partner. I know that there is a lot of innovation happening in HPP right now. So use your vendor as a partner in your production.
Yes, indeed, it's not all just placing the food or mixing the raw ingredients and it will come out like magic. It certainly may take some time, and of course that we are happy to help as well, the leader of the HPP technology. Well, with all this, I'd like to thank you again for your participation, and we will open now the floor for our next speaker, Mark Stever from Euromonitor. And again, thank you, Tony, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Benicio.
So thank you, Tony, again for the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Mark Strobel from Euromonitor, who will also present some very interesting insights on the trends, market trends for the pet food industry. So Mark, the stage is all yours if you want to get started with your presentation. And thank you for joining again.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started here. So good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Strobel. I'm a senior research manager at Euromonitor International, and I manage Euromonitor's pet care research in North America. And today I'll be presenting on trends and developments in premium dog and cat food. So very quickly, Euromonitor is a global leader in market research. We provide data and analysis for a wide range of consumer goods and services industries. And the data and information that you'll see in the presentation today comes from our platform called Passport. So before jumping into the trends, I just want to quickly set the stage regarding the pet care industry performance. So pet care has been one of the fastest growing packaged goods industries globally. We estimate that the industry reached close to 170 billion in 2022. And we also expect the industry to continue to perform strongly over the next 5 years, reaching over $250 billion by 2028, basically growing by 50% between 2022 and 2028. And this strong performance is driven in large part by premiumization, especially within dog and cat food. We've seen an undeniable trend towards premiumization in the historic period, and we expect it to even accelerate over the forecast. So looking at average unit price on the right, this is simply the overall value of dog and cat food divided by volume. So it incorporates shifts to higher price products, and growth is essentially exponential, as you can see. Unit price increases from about $3 per kilo in 2017 to $4 in 2022 to an estimated increase of about $5.25 in 2027. So what are the trends that are driving pet owners to premium dog and cat foods? That's ultimately what we'll explore in the rest of the presentation here. So there are three major areas to explore here. There are alternative formats, functionality and claims, and sustainability. Now, before getting into those points, just a bit of background here for context. First, dry kibble is the undisputed leader in global pet food. It's convenient, it's shelf stable, it's nutritious, and it's more affordable in unit price compared to wet dog and cat food. So it does offer this strong value in terms of quality and affordability. Now, on the right here is the 6-step extrusion manufacturing process. Really, for decades, ingredients has been the primary driver of premiumization. And ingredient selection really served as a primary source of brand differentiation. Now, due to difficulty in differentiating the appearance of dry kibble products themselves, packaging then serves as the primary medium for brand storytelling. So premium brands can continued to develop compelling ways to stand out on the shelf. And while premium pet food has innovated with ingredients and packaging to drive growth, the basic format of the food itself, being dry kibble, has been quite slow to change. So that takes us to the first trend here, which are alternative formats and being driven by what we call the kibble disconnect. So what we've seen historically with many pet food brands is this great marketing on the packaging, again, with these big images of fresh ingredients, wide open spaces, and wilderness scenes, these all meat claims pushing to a turn to ancestral diets. But when you open the food, you open the bag, it's basically that same old processed dry kibble that doesn't look like what the bag is claiming. So where we see a lot of growth and premiumization is coming from what we might consider these new processing methods and formats. And the pet food itself ends up actually looking more like food, similar to something that I might eat. And the three major areas that we're seeing here, one is raw. Here's a really interesting example from Chile, Huargos, that looks like a hamburger patty. And, that's a format that I'm used to meat coming in that I might toss on the grill and eat myself. And this is also where high pressure processing is most relevant as a non-thermal way of processing foods. We also have freshly cooked, so either frozen or refrigerated. This is very much gaining popularity. This brand here is the Farmer's Dog. You can see what's going into the food on one side, and that doesn't get lost in the final food format. It looks like, again, something that I might eat, and you can still see the meat and vegetables. And then finally are these new wet formats. These are things like stews, broths, soups, etc. This example comes from China, from the Gamble Group. It's a soup made for cats, again, resembling a soup that I might eat. So just another example aligned with these new format methods. And each of these new formats has seen quite strong growth in the past few years and is helping to push that premiumization in the industry. So, first, for the new wet formats, our VIA online web extraction tool allows us to see how some of these next generation wet foods are gaining in terms of market penetration in the overall pet industry. VIA records key features of hundreds of thousands of SKUs from key online retailers on a daily basis. And here I've gone back 3 years in the US looking at soups, purees, and pate SKUs and their share of total online pet food SKUs. And we can see that these new formats continue to gain year on year as people are drawn to these new humanized formats. And while this percentage growth is still pretty moderate, when we're talking of upwards of 70,000 SKUs in the US, it is a pretty notable increase. So next is freshly cooked foods. These continue to post very strong growth as well. Here are the sales of Freshpet, a global leader in the fresh pet food segment. You can see just this rapid growth trajectory, including an estimated 37% growth in 2022. Now, it's important to note that this company has largely done this in stores with their own refrigerator units, and they look great and they draw a lot of attention, but they're not exactly light in terms of capital expenditures. So one of the game changers for fresh foods is the rise of e-commerce. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation, but e-commerce has really allowed these fresh food brands to sell directly to consumers, giving them a lot of potential for growth. And then finally, raw here. There are a lot of similar advantages here from e-commerce. For example, frozen raw brand can be shipped directly to your door, just like a freshly cooked product. Again, not without logistical difficulties. So another major development in this space is freeze-dried formats. When you freeze dry the pet food, it becomes shelf stable, making it much easier to sell in a variety of other channels. And this has allowed raw products to expand and have a much greater reach in market potential. This again comes from our VIA web extraction tool. We're looking at the number of SKUs with freeze-dried claims in the US and China. And we see that in these two very large pet care markets, the number of freeze-dried products are growing quickly as the interest in raw food grows, which inherently has that premium nature. And these raw and fresh cooked and new wet formats, these fall into our classification of premium wet. Now, according to Euromonitor's lifestyle survey, about 30% of US pet owners feed their pets wet food almost every day. Also, 12% of pet owners feed raw pet food almost every day. And these trends are helping to drive premium wet dog and cat food to be by far the fastest growing segment in pet food, and penetration for these products is growing. And pet humanization is another key driver of premium food. So pet owners are increasingly treating their dogs and cats as members of their family, and therefore are taking better care of their health and nutrition needs, and boosting demand for premium pet food. According to our lifestyle survey, 71% of pet owners globally consider their pets as family members, and that portion is increasing strongly in emerging markets as well. And pet humanization overall has been an important driver for fresh cooked, new wet, and even raw trends. And human food trends are emphasizing the importance of fresh and less processed foods and healthy diets. And it's pretty well established at this point that pet food often follows human food trends. And this is also supporting format diversification within foods that are increasingly aligned with human food. So we're seeing more snacks available. This example comes from the German provider Trixie in 2021. They extended their treats varieties to waffles, as seen here, to go along with their lollipops and pretzels and cookies and donuts and more. Bush launched in late 2022 a dog brew made out of pork bone broth. And baked goods are also increasingly common. Snackadoodle, which is a cookie mix from India, allows owners to bake for their pets. The next driver of premiumization are functional ingredients and claims. Humanization is also driving interest in health-oriented products with specific functionality. And it's not just that consumers are looking for high-quality ingredients, but increasingly looking for ingredients that tackle the specific health conditions of their pets. Instinct Raw Pet Food, especially their longevity line, does a great job at highlighting the specific functional ingredients and why they're important. So, taurine for healthy heart function, probiotics and fiber for gut health, vitamins and selenium for mute health, and a variety of others. And claims are also key. So, among the most popular are natural and organic, which are expected to grow further again following human food trends. This other example comes from Viva and their complete rabbit ground food. Organic is listed 9 times on the ingredients list, making sure that's very clear to the pet owners that organic, which has a connotation for higher quality, is an emphasis here. Free from claims are also gaining popularity in pet food. According to our product claims and positioning system, the top 4 claims are grain-free, no artificial preservatives, no artificial colors, and no artificial flavors. And these are increasing their presence on packaging and promotions. And you can also see that the percent of products using these free from claims have increased basically across the board from 2019 to 2021. And as you can see from this snapshot from Chewy.com, pet owners can very easily filter for these free from claims. The last trend I'd like to discuss in premium pet food is sustainability. The idea that sustainability is a big deal in pet care is, again, pretty well established by now. And when we think about sustainability in pet food, there are really 3 areas that we're talking about here that get a lot of attention. So it's packaging, ingredients, and the actual sourcing of those ingredients. So starting here with packaging, we're seeing a lot of innovation like this one from Edgar Cooper that was launched in 2021 that uses fully recyclable packaging. This entire pet food bag can be recycled with other paper products. We're also seeing an increase in fully recyclable Tetra packaging for wet foods. And there are many other innovation in recyclable plastics and packaging made from recyclable materials. And this is really happening across the industry from major players to up and coming players as well. The other is ingredients and specifically the proteins used in pet food. So the industry overall has migrated to very meat heavy diets, but there's some blowback and concerns with that. Meat products have been targeted as not necessarily being the most environmentally friendly and having a large carbon footprint. As a result, we're seeing more innovation in sustainable proteins and meats, and even insect-based proteins. And the premium dog food company Pure Simple True in 2021 launched an insect-based food, partnering with the French insect protein processor Yinsect. And this is a really interesting example, not just because of the insect-based protein, but the fact that it's also positioned as this premium product with these tender medallions. And we're also seeing some plant-based oriented foods as well. Mars launched a new brand called Karma in 2021, a dog food that uses plant-based superfoods as the main ingredients. And yes, Karma also uses animal-based proteins, but in smaller portions to other foods. And then finally is sourcing. This is related to ingredients, but specifically about how they are sourced. Small Batch Dog is a West Coast brand that highly emphasizes this point. It has a specific seal for responsible source, and the first bullet in the descriptors is humanely raised and harvested beef. Furthermore, when you look at this brand story, it really emphasizes the ethical family run operation and also plays into the craft trend that we're seeing increasingly popular in other industries like alcoholic drinks using that name Small Batch Dog. Now, there are just a couple last things that I would be remiss not to talk about in a pet trends presentation, and that's e-commerce and private label. First, for e-commerce, there's no other way to put it than e-commerce is taking over the pet care industry. It, of course, accelerated during the pandemic and continues to grow at very high rates. So in 2019, e-commerce accounted for 17% of global pet care sales. This exploded to 23% in 2020 during the pandemic and really continues to grow. In fact, we estimate that over a third of global pet care sales in 2028 will be through e-commerce, and that number gets close to 50% in the US. And e-commerce has really enabled a lot of these premium pet care trends to come to life. First, it's enabled many of these smaller direct-to-consumer brands and fresh foods. It's allowed them to send their product directly to their clients' doorsteps without the huge overhead of refrigerators or more complex cold supply chains. And this has given a ton of potential to these brands to experience strong growth in the future. And just looking at specific site visits, we see that among the top direct-to-consumer pet food players is the Farmer's Dog, for example, that had the most visits from April 2022 to March 2023 with close to 14 million. E-commerce also has enabled a greater levels of personalization. Barkin is a brand from Portugal that creates a custom kibble based on pet-specific needs coming from a survey from pet owners. They also give access to an online dedicated vet 24/7 through a messaging system where you can ask questions at any time. And then finally, e-commerce has opened the door to some unique business models. For example, the Taiwanese company Just Kitchen launched in 2021 a freshly cooked pet food delivery. And this food is made in ghost kitchens and delivered like human foods, like human food deliveries as well. So the growth in e-commerce in pet care has really opened the door for these types of products. The final thing I'd like to mention here is the growing presence of private label in premium pet food. Overall, premium private label pet food has a small share globally at just 2.7%. It has traditionally been more focused on the economy and mid-price segments, but it's increasingly providing that premium offering as well. And this is inclusive of the fresh segment as well. For example, the Walmart brand Pure Balance here. And this has led to notable growth in premium private label sales with a CAGR of 10.3% over the past 5 years, and even higher growth in 2022 as consumers look to save money in challenging economic conditions. So just to quickly recap a few of the things that we talked about in today's presentation. First, premiumization in dog and cat food is expected to continue moving forward, supporting that really robust growth that we expect in the forecast. And this is driven by new formats, functional claims, and sustainability. And e-commerce is really acting as an enabler for these trends. And finally, private label continues to penetrate the premium pet food segment, including in fresh foods, and stands to grow moving forward. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Mark. We sure did enjoy the presentation, and I'm sure the audience as well. Actually, we have a couple of questions. So you mentioned about the trends, market trends, how pet parents are looking for premium foods, humanization, fresh ingredients. How does HPP align with these or any other major trends?
Yeah, so I think similar to e-commerce, I think that HPP acts as an enabler for a lot of these emerging trends in the pet food industry. As I mentioned, there's strong growth in the raw segment of premium food, and HPP is an effective non-thermal way to process raw foods. And the variety of challenges, of course, posed by raw foods that HPP is effective in addressing. It enhances food safety, extends shelf life, enables clean labeling, reduces food waste, and it also helps maintain taste, texture, and nutritional value, which are increasingly important to pet parents and consumers. So again, I see HPP as helping to enable these emerging trends in premium pet foods and really help drive interest in the premium wet segment.
Thank you, Mark. Well, actually, all these factors have helped HPP to come into the scene for human food consumption, the clean label, nutrition, premium foods. So how much important do you think pet parents are paying now into giving this, delivering this experience to their own pets?
Yeah, I think it is increasingly important. So something like clean labeling, for example, consumers are increasingly health conscious about what they eat, and that means understanding what it is that they're putting into their bodies. And consumers are increasingly paying attention to ingredients and want to be able to recognize and pronounce them. They're drawn to products with short ingredients lists and overall clean labels. So as mentioned during the presentation, it's pretty well understood that pet food trends follow these human food trends, especially as pet humanization continues. So consumers will be looking for these cleaner labels, these free from claims, and these specific health benefits for their pet foods. And a lot of this can be attained through some of these newer formats like the fresh foods and the raw foods, which HPP can play a big role in.
Thank you, Mark, for the answer. Well, as a market experts, now time to take out the crystal ball and maybe share a little bit of insights on the future. So companies are knowing about HPP, the benefits. What factors do you think they can take into account in order to differentiate from competitors as the market or the segment grows?
That's a great question. I think that's the magic question overall. It's a hard question to answer, but I think some things that companies can consider to perhaps stay ahead of the curve are some of those things that I talked about in the presentation. Some of these key trends, things that are important to consumers. So increasingly, it is these alternative formats, the functional and free from claims and sustainability. But now it's all well and good to say, well, I want to incorporate all of these things in my foods, but that might not be realistic from a budgetary or logistical standpoint. So I think it's important to consider, what is that angle that you or the company wants to prioritize and emphasize, and how do you get there? And whatever that aspect is that you might want to prioritize, that also needs to be loud and clear, and that value needs to be very easily understood and communicated to consumers. And whether that's prioritizing the health benefits or the sustainability aspects or the free from claims, again, that needs to be very loudly communicated to consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. Multiple factors to consider. I'm glad that you touched base or emphasize on the importance of communicating whichever direction you take, and to communicating effectively with the customers. So, just one final question to wrap up this session. You identified within your presentation China, the United States as countries with very strong growing trends. Are there any particular countries or geo-regions in the world in which new companies or established companies may be uh, maybe take a closer look and try to get into these new markets?
Great question. So, one thing to consider is that the US accounts for almost about 40% of global pet sales. So, it is definitely a core market, and China is one of the biggest markets as well. But a variety of other markets are important. So, I think thinking about these premium trends, that is going to be more targeted towards the more developed markets. So, things like areas like Western Europe, if you're thinking UK, Germany, France, for example. But we're increasingly seeing this growth and greater attention in emerging markets as well. As I mentioned before, increasingly emerging markets are also considering their pets as beloved members of their family. So, these are growth engines for the industry moving forward. So, there are opportunities around the globe. Do not only consider the developed markets. I think developing markets as well provide a lot of potential.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Again, we are running out of time, so it's time to close up the session. We would like to thank you again for this excellent view of the markets, for your participation, and again, I hope the audience enjoyed it as much as we did.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and well, ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for the next within sessions of the HPP Innovation Week. Thank you.